Good evening, and welcome. Tonight, I invite you to leave the busy world behind for a little while. Find a comfortable position, let your breathing become slow and gentle, and allow your mind to drift back through the centuries. There is nothing you need to do except listen. Together, we'll take a peaceful journey into the early history of colonial America, a story of quiet forests, endless oceans, brave travelers, and a land unlike anything they had ever seen. Imagine that it is the early 1600s. The modern world has not yet arrived. There are no highways, no trains, no airplanes, and no glowing city lights. Instead, the night sky stretches from one horizon to the other, filled with thousands of bright stars. The moon reflects softly across the calm Atlantic Ocean, where gentle waves roll endlessly toward a distant shore. Across that vast ocean lies North America, a continent of extraordinary beauty. Thick forests cover much of the eastern landscape. Mighty rivers wind through green valleys, sparkling beneath the morning sun. Mountains rise quietly in the distance, while peaceful meadows bloom with colorful wildflowers during spring. Bald eagles soar high above the trees, deer wander silently through the woods, and the air carries only the sounds of birdsong and flowing water. Long before European explorers arrived, millions of people already called this land home. For thousands of years, Native American nations had lived across North America. They were not one single people but hundreds of unique communities, each with its own language, traditions, beliefs, and stories. Along the Atlantic coast lived nations such as the Powhatan and the Wampanoag. Farther inland were many others, each deeply connected to the land they knew so well. Life followed the rhythm of nature. Spring was a season of planting. Families worked together to grow corn, beans, and squash, crops that would nourish them throughout the year. Summer brought warm sunshine, fishing, berry gathering, and long days spent caring for the fields. Autumn filled the forests with brilliant shades of gold and crimson as harvest celebrations marked another successful season. Winter invited families indoors, where children listened carefully as elders shared stories passed down through generations. Every season had its purpose. Every river, mountain, and forest carried meaning. Nature was not something to conquer but something to understand and respect. While peaceful communities flourished across North America, another story was unfolding thousands of miles away in Europe. England, France, Spain, Portugal, and the Netherlands were becoming powerful kingdoms. Merchants searched for new trade routes. Kings and queens hoped to expand their influence. Explorers dreamed of discovering lands that few Europeans had ever seen. Maps during this time looked very different from those we know today. Large sections of the world remained mysterious. Coastlines ended abruptly on parchment maps, leaving empty spaces filled only with imagination. Beyond the familiar seas lay unknown possibilities. The Atlantic Ocean seemed almost endless. Crossing it required remarkable courage. Ships were built entirely from wood, with towering masts carrying enormous canvas sails. Their journeys depended completely upon the wind. When the breeze was strong, the ships moved steadily across the water. During calm days, they drifted slowly, waiting patiently for nature to carry them forward once again. Life aboard those ships was far from comfortable. Passengers slept in narrow wooden spaces below deck. Fresh water had to be carefully rationed. Meals were simple, often consisting of salted meat, dried peas, hard biscuits, cheese, and preserved fish. Fresh fruit disappeared quickly, and weeks passed without tasting fresh vegetables. Days blended together. Morning sunlight sparkled across the sea. Afternoons were filled with the gentle sound of waves against the ship's hull. Evenings brought cool ocean breezes and beautiful sunsets that painted the sky with shades of orange, pink, and deep purple. When darkness arrived, the stars became the sailors' trusted guides. Without modern navigation, experienced captains studied the night sky carefully. The North Star and familiar constellations helped them determine their direction as they sailed westward across the immense Atlantic. Some nights the sea was perfectly calm. The moonlight shimmered across the water like polished silver. The only sounds were the soft creaking of wooden beams and the distant cries of seabirds following the ship. Other nights brought powerful storms. Dark clouds covered the sky, strong winds filled the sails, and towering waves lifted the ship high before lowering it gently into the valleys between them. Every passenger hoped the sturdy vessel would carry them safely through the storm. Weeks turned into months. The endless horizon never seemed to change. Yet every sunrise carried fresh hope that land might soon appear. Then, one quiet morning, someone standing near the bow of the ship noticed something remarkable. Far in the distance, beyond the sparkling water, a dark green line stretched across the horizon. Land. The announcement spread quickly throughout the ship. Passengers hurried onto the deck, shading their eyes as forests slowly came into view. The coastline seemed untouched and peaceful. Tall trees reached toward the sky, while rivers flowed gently into the sea. After so many weeks surrounded only by water, the sight felt almost magical. As the ships moved closer, the travelers noticed sandy beaches, quiet coves, and endless forests unlike anything they had ever seen in Europe. Carefully, small boats were lowered into the water. One by one, the explorers stepped onto the shore. For the first time in many months, they felt solid ground beneath their feet. The air smelled fresh and clean. Birds sang from nearby trees. A gentle breeze carried the scent of pine forests mixed with salty ocean air. Everything seemed peaceful. Yet the newcomers soon realized this beautiful land was not empty. Smoke rose gently above distant villages hidden among the trees. Footpaths crossed the forests. Fields of corn grew beside carefully built homes. Fishing canoes glided quietly along calm rivers. Native American communities had lived here for generations, building lives deeply connected to the land. The first meetings between Europeans and Native Americans were filled with curiosity. Neither side fully understood the other's language. Simple gestures became the first conversations. Sometimes they exchanged gifts. Sometimes they traded useful goods. Metal tools, colorful glass beads, and woven cloth were exchanged for food, animal furs, and local knowledge about the forests and rivers. These early encounters were often cautious, as both groups tried to understand one another. The newcomers quickly discovered that surviving in this unfamiliar environment would require patience. The forests were vast. The seasons differed from those back home. The rivers followed unfamiliar paths. Native American knowledge became invaluable. They understood where fish gathered during different times of the year. They knew which plants could safely be eaten and which should be avoided. They understood the changing weather and the best places to plant crops. Without this wisdom, life in the New World would be much harder. Meanwhile, more ships prepared to leave Europe. Each vessel carried people with different dreams. Some hoped to find wealth. Others searched for religious freedom. Many simply wanted a better future for their children. As the Atlantic became a busy pathway between continents, the quiet shores of North America slowly began to change. Small settlements would soon appear. Wooden homes would rise beside peaceful rivers. Church bells would echo through tiny villages. Fields would replace sections of forest, while new roads slowly connected growing communities. But all of that still lay in the future. For now, the forests remained peaceful. Morning mist drifted gently across quiet rivers. Wildflowers bloomed beneath towering trees. The songs of birds filled the air from sunrise until sunset. Nature continued its timeless rhythm, unaware that history was quietly preparing to change forever. And among the many ships crossing the Atlantic was one expedition that would establish England's first permanent settlement in North America, a small community beside a quiet river called Jamestown. That is where our journey will continue. As more ships quietly crossed the Atlantic Ocean, England became increasingly interested in establishing a permanent settlement in North America. Earlier expeditions had come and gone, but none had created a lasting community. The next journey, however, would become one of the most important in American history. In December of 1606, 3 ships slowly departed England. They were called the Susan Constant, the Godspeed, and the Discovery. Together, they carried just over 100 settlers. Some were skilled craftsmen. Others were soldiers, merchants, laborers, or gentlemen hoping to find opportunity in the New World. The voyage lasted more than 4 months. The Atlantic Ocean greeted them with both calm days and powerful storms. Gentle breezes carried the ship steadily westward, while rough weather occasionally forced everyone below deck. The wooden ships creaked with every wave, and the sails snapped softly in the wind. Life aboard remained simple. Each morning began with the sound of sailors climbing the tall masts to adjust the sails. Meals consisted of salted meat, dried peas, hard biscuits, and fresh water that was carefully rationed. Space was limited, and comfort was a rare luxury. Still, hope remained strong. The settlers spoke about the future they imagined. Some believed they would discover gold hidden within the forests. Others dreamed of building prosperous farms and peaceful villages. Many simply wished for a new beginning far from the crowded cities of England. Finally, during the spring of 1607, land appeared on the horizon. The ships entered the broad waters of the Chesapeake Bay before sailing into a beautiful river surrounded by endless forests. The river was calm, reflecting the bright blue sky above. Birds circled overhead while gentle breezes carried the fresh scent of pine trees across the water. After carefully exploring the area, the settlers selected a small peninsula beside the river. It seemed easy to defend because water surrounded it on 3 sides. Here they would build their new home. The settlement was named Jamestown, honoring King James I of England. Work began immediately. Tall trees were carefully cut down using iron axes. Strong wooden logs became walls for a protective fort built in the shape of a triangle. Inside the fort, the settlers constructed small houses, storage buildings, workshops, and a modest church where they gathered for prayer. Every day followed a steady rhythm. At sunrise, workers collected fresh water and prepared simple meals over open fires. Others repaired tools, gathered firewood, or searched for food in the surrounding forests. Some fished in the nearby river, while skilled carpenters built furniture and strengthened the growing settlement. Although everyone worked hard, life proved much more difficult than expected. Many settlers had never farmed before. They had expected to find valuable minerals rather than spend long days planting crops or building shelters. The unfamiliar climate also created challenges. Virginia's summers were warm and humid. Mosquitoes filled the marshes surrounding the settlement. Fresh drinking water sometimes became difficult to find because the river's water turned slightly salty during high tides. Illness spread quickly through the small community, leaving many settlers too weak to work. Food soon became another concern. The supplies brought from England slowly disappeared. Hunting required knowledge of unfamiliar forests, and successful farming would take time. Fortunately, the region was already home to the Powhatan Confederacy, a collection of Native American communities led by Chief Powhatan. These villages had existed for generations before the English arrived. At first, both groups observed each other carefully, curiosity mixed with uncertainty. Sometimes peaceful meetings took place beside the river. The English traded copper tools, metal axes, knives, glass beads, and woven cloth. In return, the Powhatan people offered corn, fish, venison, and other foods that helped the settlers survive. Perhaps even more valuable than food was knowledge. The Powhatan understood the seasons better than anyone else. They knew when fish filled the rivers. They knew where fresh water could be found. They knew which plants could be safely gathered from the forests. The settlers slowly began learning from those who had lived on this land for countless generations. As summer turned into autumn, preparations for winter became increasingly important. Wood was gathered for fires. Food was carefully stored. Homes were repaired against the coming cold. Yet despite everyone's efforts, the colony entered one of its darkest periods. The winter of 1609 and 1610 later became known as the starving time. Food supplies grew dangerously low. Disease spread through the settlement. The cold weather made survival even more difficult. Many settlers became weak from hunger, and only a small portion of the original colonists remained alive by the time spring finally arrived. For a time, it seemed as though Jamestown might disappear forever. Then, hope arrived from across the Atlantic. English supply ships entered the James River carrying food, tools, medicines, and new settlers. Their arrival brought fresh energy to the struggling colony. Jamestown would survive. Among those who helped shape the colony's future was John Rolfe. Rather than searching endlessly for gold, he focused on farming. He carefully experimented with a sweeter variety of tobacco that thrived in Virginia's rich soil. Before long, tobacco became the colony's most valuable crop. Fields stretched along the riverbanks. Farmers worked quietly beneath the warm sun while boats carried harvested tobacco to waiting ships. Every year, vessels sailed back to England loaded with barrels of dried tobacco leaves. Trade steadily increased. With growing prosperity came new opportunities. Additional homes were built. Workshops expanded. Blacksmiths crafted tools and horseshoes. Carpenters built sturdy furniture and repaired houses. Farmers cleared more land for crops. Children laughed while playing between simple wooden homes. Church bells marked Sundays and special occasions. The settlement that had once struggled to survive slowly transformed into a permanent community. Nature remained an important part of everyday life. Early each morning, mist drifted gently across the James River. Songbirds welcomed the sunrise. White-tailed deer quietly crossed forest paths. At night, lanterns glowed softly inside wooden cabins while the sounds of crickets and frogs filled the warm Virginia air. Above, thousands of brilliant stars stretched across the dark sky, far brighter than most settlers had ever seen back in England. Jamestown was still a small settlement surrounded by endless wilderness, yet it had become something remarkable. It was England's first permanent foothold in North America. More ships would soon arrive. More families would cross the Atlantic. More villages would appear along the coastline. Slowly and quietly, the foundations of colonial America were beginning to take shape. Far to the north, however, another group of English travelers was preparing for a very different journey, one motivated not by wealth, but by faith and the hope of finding religious freedom. Their ship was called the Mayflower, and its voyage would become one of the most famous in American history. While Jamestown slowly found its footing in the warm lands of Virginia, another group of English men, women, and children dreamed of a different kind of future. They were not searching for gold or riches. Instead, they longed for a place where they could worship according to their own beliefs without fear or interference. These families became known as the Pilgrims. For several years, they had lived in the Netherlands, where they enjoyed greater religious freedom. Although life there was peaceful, many worried that their children were slowly losing their English language and traditions. They hoped to build a new community where they could preserve both their faith and their way of life. In the late summer of 1620, preparations quietly began for another voyage across the Atlantic Ocean. Their ship was called the Mayflower. Compared with modern ships, the Mayflower was quite small, measuring only about 100 feet in length. Yet it carried more than 100 passengers, along with supplies, tools, seeds, clothing, livestock, and everything needed to begin a new settlement in an unfamiliar land. On a cool September morning, the ship slowly left the English coast. Family members stood silently on the deck as the shoreline gradually disappeared into the distance. Some wondered if they would ever see their homeland again. Others looked westward toward the endless ocean, filled with hope for the future that awaited them. The Atlantic stretched endlessly before them. For 66 days, the Mayflower crossed the vast ocean. Life aboard the ship required patience and courage. The passengers lived in very crowded conditions. They slept close together below deck, where fresh air was limited and sunlight rarely entered. Meals remained simple, often consisting of salted meat, dried fish, cheese, oatmeal, and hard biscuits that had been carefully stored before the journey began. Each morning, Sailors climbed high into the rigging to adjust the sails according to the changing winds. Their movements seemed almost graceful as they balanced confidently above the rolling sea. Some days the weather remained calm. Gentle waves rocked the ship softly, creating a peaceful rhythm that continued from sunrise until sunset. Passengers spent these quiet hours talking together, reading from the Bible, mending clothing, or simply gazing across the endless blue horizon. Children played small games whenever space allowed. They listened carefully as older family members shared stories about England, hoping to comfort them during the long journey. At night, the ocean became especially beautiful. The moon reflected across the water like silver, while countless stars filled the sky above. With no city lights anywhere nearby, the heavens appeared brighter than most people had ever seen. The gentle creaking of the wooden ship blended with the soft sounds of wind and waves. It was a peaceful kind of silence. Yet not every day was calm. Several powerful storms swept across the Atlantic during the voyage. Strong winds pushed against the towering sails, while enormous waves lifted the Mayflower high before gently lowering her once again. Rain fell heavily upon the wooden deck as sailors worked together through the darkness, securing ropes and protecting the ship from the fierce weather. Despite these challenges, the Mayflower continued westward. Week after week, the passengers waited patiently. Finally, during November, someone spotted land. A cry echoed across the deck. Everyone hurried outside. Far ahead lay the sandy coastline of what is now Cape Cod, in present-day Massachusetts. The long voyage had finally come to an end. Although the Pilgrims had originally intended to settle farther south near Virginia, changing winds and difficult weather had carried them north instead. Rather than continue through dangerous waters late in the season, they decided to remain where they were. Before anyone stepped ashore, however, the passengers gathered for an important discussion. Because they had arrived outside the area covered by their original charter, they believed they should create an agreement that would help keep their new community peaceful and organized. This agreement became known as the Mayflower Compact. It was a simple document. Those who signed it promised to work together, create fair laws, and support the common good of the settlement. Although they could not have imagined it at the time, historians would later view the Mayflower Compact as an early example of self-government in colonial America. Soon afterward, the settlers carefully explored the surrounding coastline. They searched for fresh water, fertile land, and a safe harbor where ships could anchor. Eventually, they chose a quiet place they named Plymouth. Winter was already beginning. Snow soon covered the forests. Cold winds swept across the shoreline. The settlers worked tirelessly to build simple wooden homes before the harshest weather arrived. Every day brought new challenges. Trees had to be cut down. Logs needed to be shaped by hand. Roofs required careful construction to keep out snow and rain. Many families still lived aboard the Mayflower while their homes were being completed. The first winter proved extremely difficult. Cold weather, limited food, and illness affected nearly everyone. Many settlers became weak. Some families lost loved ones during those long winter months. By the time spring finally arrived, nearly half of the original passengers had passed away. Yet those who remained continued moving forward with quiet determination. As warmer days returned, something remarkable happened. The settlers met members of the Wampanoag Nation, who had lived in the region for countless generations. Among them was Tisquantum, better known today as Squanto. His story was extraordinary. Having previously traveled to Europe and learned English, Squanto could communicate with the newcomers more easily than anyone expected. He became an important friend and guide. Patiently, he taught the settlers how to survive in their new home. He showed them how to plant corn using fish to enrich the soil. He explained where rivers offered the best fishing. He pointed out edible plants growing naturally throughout the forests. He helped them understand the changing seasons of New England. His knowledge made an enormous difference. The Wampanoag people also established peaceful relations with the Plymouth settlers. Together, they created an agreement that helped maintain peace between their communities for many years. As spring turned into summer, the colony slowly grew stronger. Fresh green leaves covered the forests. Wildflowers blossomed across open fields. Corn stretched steadily upward beneath the warm sunshine. The settlers repaired homes, planted gardens, gathered firewood, and prepared for the coming autumn. Their hard work was finally beginning to bear fruit. When harvest season arrived in the autumn of 1621, there was much to be thankful for. The corn harvest had been successful. Food filled the storage houses. The colony had survived its first difficult year. To celebrate, the settlers invited members of the Wampanoag community to join them. For several peaceful days, families gathered outdoors to share meals, conversation, games, and gratitude. They enjoyed roasted wild fowl, venison, corn, pumpkins, squash, berries, and other foods gathered from the surrounding land. Children laughed together. Adults exchanged stories. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of wood smoke and falling leaves. Although no one knew it then, this gathering would later inspire the American holiday known as Thanksgiving. As evening settled over Plymouth Colony, lanterns glowed softly inside the newly built homes. The forest stood quietly beneath a sky filled with brilliant stars. Gentle waves rolled onto the nearby shore, just as they had for thousands of years. The little colony remained small, surrounded by endless wilderness, yet hope had quietly taken root. In time, more families would arrive. New villages would appear. The peaceful settlement at Plymouth would become one of the earliest chapters in the growing story of colonial America. And with each passing year, the eastern coastline would welcome more settlers, leading to the creation of the 13 colonies, whose story continues in the next part. As the years passed, the small settlements of Jamestown and Plymouth slowly grew into thriving communities. The Atlantic Ocean, once an intimidating barrier, became a familiar route connecting England with the eastern shores of North America. Every year, more wooden sailing ships crossed the sea, carrying families, craftsmen, farmers, merchants, ministers, and adventurers, each hoping to build a peaceful new life. The coastline that had once seemed wild and untouched gradually welcomed new villages. Tiny wooden homes appeared beside rivers and sheltered harbors. Smoke drifted gently from stone chimneys, while church bells echoed across quiet mornings. The forests remained vast, but scattered clearings slowly expanded as fields of corn, wheat, and vegetables replaced small sections of woodland. One by one, new English colonies were established. Far to the north, Massachusetts Bay Colony was founded in 1630 by a group of Puritans seeking religious freedom. Led by John Winthrop, they hoped to build what he described as a city upon a hill, a community that would serve as an example of faith, hard work, and cooperation. Their principal town, Boston, grew steadily along a beautiful natural harbor. Fishing boats sailed into the bay before sunrise, while merchant ships arrived carrying goods from England and other colonies. Along the narrow streets, blacksmiths, bakers, carpenters, and merchants worked quietly from morning until evening. Children attended small schools where they learned to read and write, often using the Bible as their primary textbook. Education became an important part of daily life, especially in New England, where many believed that reading scripture was essential. Not far from Boston, another important milestone quietly took place. In 1636, Harvard College was founded. It was the first institution of higher learning in the English colonies. At first, it consisted of only a few buildings and a small number of students. Yet its creation reflected the colonists' belief that education would help shape the future of their growing communities. Meanwhile, farther south, other colonies began to flourish. Maryland was founded in 1634 as a place where English Catholics could practice their faith more freely. Fertile farmland and peaceful rivers made it an excellent place for farming, and tobacco soon became one of its most valuable crops. To the west of Massachusetts, the fertile Connecticut River Valley attracted new settlers. The colony of Connecticut developed rich farmland, while nearby Rhode Island, founded by Roger Williams, became known for its remarkable commitment to religious freedom and tolerance. Williams believed that people should be free to worship according to their own conscience without interference from the government. His ideas were unusual for the time, yet they helped shape principles that would later become important throughout America. As the decades passed, the middle colonies also began to take shape. The region that would eventually become New York had originally been settled by the Dutch, who called it New Amsterdam. The town stood on the southern tip of Manhattan Island, where merchant ships arrived from many parts of the world. In 1664, England peacefully gained control of the colony, renaming it New York in honor of the Duke of York. Unlike many other settlements, New York quickly became a place where people from many different countries lived side by side. English, Dutch, German, French, and many others contributed to the colony's rich culture. Nearby, Pennsylvania emerged under the leadership of William Penn, a Quaker who believed strongly in peace, fairness, and religious tolerance. Penn carefully planned the city of Philadelphia, designing wide streets, public squares, and green spaces. His vision created one of the most organized and welcoming cities in colonial America. Philadelphia soon became a busy center of commerce. Ships filled its harbor. Markets overflowed with fresh produce, handmade goods, books, and imported products from across the Atlantic. Printers published newspapers and pamphlets that carried news throughout the colonies, helping distant communities remain connected. Farther south, the colonies of North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia developed different economies shaped by their warmer climates. Large farms produced rice, indigo, and other valuable crops. Rivers served as important transportation routes, allowing goods to travel from inland plantations to busy coastal ports. Although each colony developed its own customs and traditions, many aspects of everyday life remained remarkably similar. Most people lived close to nature. Morning often began before sunrise. Roosters announced the coming day, while smoke curled gently upward from kitchen chimneys. Families gathered around simple wooden tables for breakfast before beginning another day of work. Farmers tended their crops. Blacksmiths shaped glowing iron into useful tools. Carpenters built sturdy homes and barns from freshly cut timber. Millers ground grain into flour using water-powered mills built beside flowing streams. Women managed busy households, prepared meals, spun wool into thread, and cared for children. Life moved at a slower pace. There were no engines or electric lights. The changing seasons determined nearly every activity. Spring brought planting. Summer encouraged long days of work beneath the warm sun. Autumn became a season of harvest. Winter invited families indoors, where candlelight illuminated evenings filled with reading, sewing, music, and storytelling. Travel between colonies was often slow but peaceful. Horseback riders followed winding dirt roads through forests and open fields. Small ferries crossed rivers, while sailing vessels carried passengers along the coastline between growing ports. The Atlantic Ocean remained central to colonial life. Merchant ships arrived regularly carrying books, cloth, tea, furniture, tools, and fine china from England. In return, the colonies exported tobacco, lumber, fish, furs, wheat, and other valuable products. Gradually, prosperity increased. Small villages became thriving towns. Simple trading posts evolved into busy marketplaces. Churches, schools, inns, and courthouses appeared in communities throughout the colonies. By the early 18th century, 13 English colonies stretched along the Atlantic coast, each unique in its geography and character, yet connected through trade, language, and shared traditions. Still, despite their growth, most colonists lived quiet lives centered on family, faith, and the natural rhythms of the land. As evening settled over colonial America, lanterns glowed softly in windows from Massachusetts to Georgia. Fishing boats rested peacefully in sheltered harbors. Horses slept quietly in wooden barns. The forests whispered gently in the cool night breeze, while countless stars shone brightly above the peaceful countryside. Few people could imagine that these growing colonies would one day unite to form a new nation. For now, life continued at its gentle pace, shaped by the seasons, sustained by hard work, and surrounded by the quiet beauty of the American wilderness. The next chapter of our journey will take us inside the everyday lives of ordinary colonial families, exploring their homes, traditions, work, and simple pleasures from sunrise to sunset. As the 13 colonies continued to grow, life settled into a peaceful rhythm guided by the changing seasons, the rising and setting of the sun, and the steady routines of family and community. While great events were beginning to shape history, most colonists lived simple lives, focused on their homes, their neighbors, and the work that each new day required. Imagine waking before sunrise in a small colonial village. The first sounds of the morning are not alarm clocks or passing cars, but the gentle crowing of a rooster, the soft lowing of cattle, and birds greeting the new day from the nearby forest. A faint mist hangs over the fields. The cool morning air carries the scent of fresh earth, pine trees, and wood smoke drifting from stone chimneys. Inside a modest wooden farmhouse, the family is already awake. A fire that burned through the night is carefully stirred back to life. Sparks rise gently into the chimney as fresh logs are added. Soon the room fills with warmth, and the smell of breakfast begins to spread through the house. Most colonial homes were simple but comfortable. Many were built from hand-cut timber, while others were made of brick in larger towns. A typical house had only a few rooms. Furniture was handmade, often by the family or local craftsmen. Wooden tables, sturdy chairs, shelves filled with pottery, and woven rugs created a welcoming place to gather. Large windows were uncommon, so daylight entered through small panes of glass. At night, candles and oil lamps provided a gentle glow that filled each room with warm, golden light. Breakfast was usually simple. Fresh bread baked the day before, porridge made from oats or cornmeal, eggs collected that morning, butter, cheese, and sometimes smoked ham were common meals. Families often thanked God before eating, beginning each day with quiet gratitude. Soon after breakfast, everyone had responsibilities. On farms, the day's work began early. The fields needed constant care. Corn, wheat, barley, and vegetables required watering, weeding, and harvesting depending on the season. Horses pulled wooden plows through rich soil while oxen helped transport heavy loads of timber and grain. Children learned by helping their parents. Young boys gathered firewood, cared for animals, repaired fences, and assisted with planting. Girls often helped prepare meals, sew clothing, spin wool into thread, make candles, and care for younger brothers and sisters. Although the work could be difficult, families spent much of the day together, sharing responsibilities and learning valuable skills that would last a lifetime. Animals played an important role in everyday life. Cows provided fresh milk. Chickens laid eggs. Sheep supplied wool for warm clothing. Horses carried people and pulled wagons along dusty roads. Even the family dog had important duties, helping guard livestock and keeping watch over the farm. Not everyone lived on farms. In growing towns like Boston, Philadelphia, and New York, skilled craftsmen filled the streets with the sounds of daily work. The blacksmith's hammer rang steadily against glowing iron. Carpenters shaped smooth boards into furniture and homes. Coopers carefully built wooden barrels used to store flour, tobacco, and salted fish. Shoemakers stitched strong leather boots by hand. Printers operated heavy presses that produced newspapers, books, and pamphlets, spreading news across the colonies. The scent of freshly baked bread drifted from neighborhood bakeries. Markets became lively gathering places. Farmers arrived with wagons full of vegetables, apples, pumpkins, cheese, butter, honey, and fresh herbs. Fishermen displayed baskets filled with cod, oysters, and clams caught along the Atlantic coast. Merchants offered cloth imported from England, colorful ribbons, fine tea, glassware, books, and carefully crafted tools. People greeted one another warmly as they shopped. News traveled quickly through conversation. Neighbors exchanged stories while children played nearby. Education was valued, especially in New England. Small schoolhouses welcomed children eager to learn reading, writing, arithmetic, and history. Teachers often used simple wooden slates and handwritten lessons. Books were treasured possessions because they were expensive and difficult to replace. Many families owned only a Bible and perhaps a few additional volumes. Reading together during the evening became an important family tradition. Religion remained central to colonial life. On Sundays, families dressed in their finest clothing before walking or riding to church. Church buildings were usually simple, with wooden benches and clear glass windows. Services often lasted several hours, giving neighbors time to gather, share news, and strengthen their sense of community. The changing seasons shaped every aspect of life. Spring brought new beginnings. Gardens were planted. Fruit trees blossomed with delicate white and pink flowers. Birdsong filled the forests once again. Summer became the busiest season. Long daylight hours allowed families to work from sunrise until sunset. Crops grew rapidly beneath the warm sunshine, while rivers provided fish and transportation. Autumn arrived with cool breezes and colorful forests. Leaves turned brilliant shades of gold, orange, and crimson. Harvest festivals celebrated another successful growing season. Apples were gathered into baskets. Pumpkins filled wagons. Corn was carefully stored for the winter ahead. Winter transformed the countryside into a peaceful landscape. Snow covered rooftops and fields. Frozen ponds sparkled beneath bright winter skies. Families remained indoors more often, repairing tools, spinning wool, quilting blankets, reading books, and sharing stories beside the fireplace. Children enjoyed simple games made from handmade toys. Music also filled many homes. Violins, flutes, and small drums provided entertainment during gatherings and celebrations. Neighbors sometimes visited one another during long winter evenings, bringing homemade pies or fresh bread to share while exchanging stories that had been passed down for generations. Travel remained slow but enjoyable. Horseback riders followed winding roads through forests and valleys. Stagecoaches connected larger towns, although journeys often required several days. Along the coast, graceful sailing ships carried passengers between ports, their white sails shining brightly against the blue Atlantic. Nighttime brought a special kind of peace. Without electric lights, darkness arrived gently after sunset. Families finished supper together before lighting candles. Some quietly read books. Others mended clothing or carved wooden tools. Children listened as grandparents told stories about earlier days, distant lands, or adventures across the Atlantic Ocean. Outside, the night remained wonderfully still. Owls called softly from the forest. Crickets sang beneath the stars. The Milky Way stretched brilliantly across the sky, brighter than most people today ever have the chance to see. Life in colonial America was not always easy. Storms sometimes damaged crops. Winters could be harsh. Illness occasionally visited small communities. Yet through cooperation, faith, and determination, families built lives filled with purpose and hope. Their quiet routines laid the foundations of towns and cities that would continue growing for generations. As another peaceful evening settles across the colonies, lanterns glow warmly behind small windows from New England to Georgia. Gentle breezes move through fields ready for tomorrow's work, while rivers continue their timeless journey toward the sea. Beyond these peaceful communities, trade, new ideas, and growing prosperity were beginning to transform the colonies into a thriving part of the Atlantic world. As the years passed, the 13 colonies became more connected than ever before. What had once been scattered settlements surrounded by wilderness were slowly growing into lively towns and busy ports. Ships crossed the Atlantic throughout the year, carrying people, ideas, and goods between Europe, Africa, the Caribbean, and North America. Although life still moved at a peaceful pace, the colonies were becoming an important part of the wider world. Imagine standing on the waterfront of Boston just after sunrise. The harbor is calm, and a thin blanket of morning mist drifts across the water. One by one, sailing ships glide quietly toward the docks. Their tall wooden masts reach high into the sky, while neatly folded sails flutter gently in the cool ocean breeze. Dock workers prepare ropes as captains carefully guide their ships alongside the wooden piers. The harbor slowly comes alive. Barrels filled with flour are rolled onto the docks. Bundles of timber are stacked neatly beside warehouses. Crates of apples, pumpkins, dried fish, and handmade tools wait to be loaded aboard vessels preparing for long journeys across the Atlantic. Nearby, fishermen return from the sea with boats full of cod, mackerel, and shellfish. The salty air mixes with the scent of fresh pine, sea breeze, and warm bread drifting from nearby bakeries. Merchants greet familiar sailors with friendly smiles. Neighbors exchange morning conversations before beginning another day of work. Farther south, New York continued to grow into one of the busiest ports in the colonies. People from many different countries made their homes there. English, Dutch, German, French, Scottish, Irish, and many others lived side by side, creating a rich blend of languages, customs, and traditions. Walking through the streets, a traveler could hear several different languages spoken within a single afternoon. Markets overflowed with colorful goods from distant lands. Silks from Asia. Tea from China. Coffee from the Caribbean. Spices from around the world. Fine pottery, books, clocks, and carefully crafted furniture all found their way into colonial homes. Meanwhile, Philadelphia quietly became one of the largest and most beautiful cities in North America. Its wide streets were carefully planned. Rows of brick houses lined peaceful neighborhoods. Public squares offered places where families gathered, children played, and neighbors shared conversations beneath the shade of large trees. Benjamin Franklin, one of Philadelphia's most famous residents, helped establish libraries, volunteer fire companies, and organizations that encouraged education and community service. His curiosity about science and invention inspired many people throughout the colonies. Trade became the lifeblood of colonial prosperity. Farmers harvested wheat, corn, and vegetables. Virginia and Maryland continued producing large amounts of tobacco. The southern colonies cultivated rice and indigo. New England became famous for fishing, shipbuilding, and lumber. Massive forests supplied strong oak and pine used to build some of the finest sailing ships in the Atlantic world. Shipyards echoed with the rhythmic sounds of saws and hammers as skilled craftsmen shaped enormous wooden beams into graceful vessels capable of crossing oceans. Every completed ship represented months of careful work. Once launched into the water, these beautiful sailing ships carried both dreams and opportunities across thousands of miles of open sea. Roads connecting the colonies also slowly improved. Although still rough and sometimes muddy after rain, they allowed wagons loaded with crops and supplies to travel between neighboring towns. Horseback remained one of the fastest ways to travel over land. Stagecoaches connected larger communities, carrying passengers, letters, and important news. Mail traveled slowly compared with today. A letter sent from Boston to Charleston could take weeks to arrive. Yet every message was treasured, often read several times before being carefully stored. Communication helped the colonies feel more connected despite the great distances separating them. Printing presses became increasingly important. Newspapers shared stories about trade, weather, discoveries, and events taking place both in America and Europe. Books became more available as printers worked tirelessly to produce educational materials, religious writings, and collections of poetry. Coffeehouses appeared in larger towns. These welcoming places became gathering spots where merchants discussed business, travelers shared stories from distant lands, and thoughtful conversations filled the rooms late into the evening. Ideas traveled almost as quickly as ships. People discussed science, philosophy, education, and the responsibilities of government. Although daily life remained peaceful for most families, new ways of thinking were quietly spreading throughout the colonies. Despite growing towns, much of colonial America remained wonderfully rural. Large forests still stretched for hundreds of miles. Clear rivers flowed through peaceful valleys. Wildlife remained abundant. Travelers often described seeing deer grazing quietly at sunrise, flocks of wild turkeys wandering through forests, and bald eagles soaring high above broad rivers. Nature continued to shape everyday life. Families still depended upon the changing seasons. Spring remained a time for planting. Summer brought busy harvest preparations. Autumn filled barns with grain and vegetables. Winter invited quiet evenings beside warm fireplaces. As darkness settled each evening, towns became peaceful. Without electric lights, only candles and lanterns illuminated the streets. Shopkeepers closed their doors shortly after sunset. The sound of horses gradually disappeared. Church bells marked the passing hours. Above every village, countless stars stretched across the clear night sky. The Milky Way shone brightly over forests, rivers, and quiet farms. It was a peaceful world where nature remained close and every season brought its own beauty. Yet while prosperity continued to grow, changes were beginning to unfold across the Atlantic Ocean. The government in Britain faced growing financial challenges after costly wars, and new policies would soon affect the colonies in unexpected ways. Most colonists could not yet imagine how these distant decisions would slowly change their relationship with Great Britain. For now, however, life continued peacefully. Ships sailed in and out of busy harbors. Families gathered around warm evening fires. Children learned their lessons by candlelight. Farmers prepared for another changing season. The colonies had become stronger, wealthier, and more confident than ever before. Soon, new ideas about freedom, representation, and self-government would begin to spread from town to town, setting the stage for one of the most important chapters in American history. By the middle of the 18th century, the 13 colonies had grown into thriving communities. Bustling ports welcomed ships from across the Atlantic, fertile farms stretched across the countryside, and small villages had become lively towns filled with markets, churches, schools, and workshops. For many families, life followed the same peaceful rhythm it had for generations. The sun rose over fields of corn and wheat. Fishing boats quietly left their harbors before dawn. Blacksmiths lit their forges. Children hurried to schoolhouses carrying small books beneath their arms. Merchants opened their shops as neighbors greeted one another along narrow streets. It was a world that seemed calm and familiar. Yet beyond the forests and mountains, events were quietly unfolding that would change the future of every colony. Far to the west lay the vast Ohio Valley, a beautiful region of rivers, forests, and rolling hills. For many Native American nations, this land had long been an important place for hunting, trading, and travel. But European powers also recognized its value. Both Britain and France hoped to control the region. French traders had already built a network of forts connected by rivers stretching from Canada toward the Mississippi River. British settlers, meanwhile, continued moving westward, searching for fertile farmland and new opportunities. As more people entered the region, disagreements slowly increased. At first, these disputes seemed distant from everyday life along the Atlantic coast. Most colonists continued planting crops, building homes, and raising families without realizing that history was quietly changing around them. Then, in 1754, conflict finally began. Historians now remember it as the French and Indian War, the North American part of a much larger struggle known around the world as the 7 Years' War. The conflict lasted several years. British soldiers, colonial militias, French troops, and many Native American allies all became involved. Across forests, rivers, and mountain valleys, forts were built, defended, and sometimes abandoned. Although the war brought hardship to many communities, everyday life continued for countless families living far from the battlefields. Back in the colonies, farmers still harvested their crops. Children continued attending school. Church bells rang every Sunday morning. Ships crossed the Atlantic carrying goods between America and Europe. Eventually, after years of fighting, Britain emerged victorious. In 1763, the war officially ended. Britain gained control of large areas of North America that had previously belonged to France. Many colonists celebrated the victory. They believed the future looked brighter than ever. Yet the war had been extremely expensive. The British government had borrowed enormous amounts of money to support its armies and navy. Leaders in London now faced an important question. How could they pay these growing debts? Their answer would slowly change the relationship between Britain and the colonies. New taxes and trade regulations were introduced. One of the first was the Sugar Act, followed by the Stamp Act in 1765. For the first time, many printed documents, including newspapers, legal papers, licenses, and even playing cards, required an official government stamp that had to be purchased. Many colonists felt uneasy. It was not simply the cost of the tax that troubled them. Instead, they believed they should have representatives helping make decisions about taxes that affected their daily lives. A phrase quietly spread from town to town. No taxation without representation. People repeated these words in coffeehouses, marketplaces, taverns, and meeting halls. Merchants discussed them while unloading ships. Printers published thoughtful essays in local newspapers. Neighbors talked together after church services. Most people still hoped disagreements could be resolved peacefully. They considered themselves loyal British subjects. Few imagined that independence might someday become possible. As discussions continued, communities began organizing meetings to share their concerns. Letters traveled between colonies more frequently than ever before. Leaders exchanged ideas about cooperation and mutual support. Although the colonies remained separate governments, they slowly discovered that they shared many common hopes for the future. Daily life, however, continued much as before. In New England, fishermen sailed into the Atlantic before sunrise. In Pennsylvania, farmers harvested fields of wheat beneath warm summer skies. In Virginia, tobacco plants gently swayed in the breeze. Along southern rivers, boats quietly carried rice and indigo toward coastal ports. The changing seasons continued their timeless cycle. Spring brought blossoms to orchards. Summer filled forests with birdsong. Autumn painted the hillsides in brilliant shades of red, gold, and orange. Winter covered rooftops with fresh snow while families gathered beside warm fireplaces. Life remained closely connected to nature. Even as political conversations became more common, ordinary people still found comfort in familiar routines. Children laughed while playing simple games outdoors. Families gathered for evening meals by candlelight. Neighbors helped one another build barns, harvest crops, and repair homes after storms. In Boston, one of the colony's busiest ports, public discussions became especially lively. Ships arrived carrying tea, cloth, books, and many other goods from England. Merchants carefully watched each new law announced by Parliament. Some welcomed cooperation with Britain. Others believed the colonies deserved a greater voice in their own government. Despite these disagreements, most conversations remained thoughtful and respectful. People hoped that peaceful solutions could still be found. Across the countryside, life continued quietly beneath vast skies. Travelers followed winding dirt roads through peaceful forests. Horse-drawn wagons crossed wooden bridges spanning clear rivers. Church steeples rose above small villages surrounded by farmland. At sunset, lanterns glowed softly inside windows as families settled in for another peaceful evening. No one could know exactly what the future would bring. The colonies had changed greatly since the first settlers arrived more than a century earlier. Small settlements had become prosperous communities. Busy ports connected America with distant parts of the world. Schools, churches, libraries, and marketplaces had become part of everyday life. Yet new questions about freedom, representation, and self-government were quietly growing. These ideas would soon shape one of the most remarkable chapters in history. As another calm night settles over colonial America, the forests grow silent beneath a sky filled with stars. The rivers continue their gentle journey toward the sea. Ships rest quietly in peaceful harbors. Families extinguish their candles one by one, unaware that a new chapter is about to begin. As the years passed, conversations about the future of the 13 colonies became more common. What had once been quiet discussions among merchants, farmers, ministers, and community leaders slowly spread to towns and villages across the Atlantic coast. Most colonists still considered themselves loyal subjects of the British Crown. They had built homes, raised families, planted orchards, opened schools, and established thriving communities. Many hoped that their disagreements with Britain could be settled peacefully through understanding and compromise. Yet the distance between London and the colonies was immense. News crossed the Atlantic only by sailing ship. A single message often took weeks or even months to arrive. Misunderstandings were common, and each new law or decision seemed to create fresh questions. Throughout the colonies, people gathered in churches, town halls, taverns, and meeting houses to discuss the future. Farmers paused their work after long days in the fields. Merchants spoke quietly beside busy harbors. Printers carefully prepared newspapers that carried thoughtful essays and letters from respected voices across the colonies. These conversations helped create a growing sense of unity. Although Massachusetts, Virginia, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, and the other colonies each had their own customs and traditions, many people began to realize they shared common hopes for the future. They valued their local communities. They believed in hard work. They cared deeply about their families and neighbors. Above all, they hoped to preserve the freedoms they had come to cherish. In the spring of 1775, tensions eventually grew into open conflict. Small groups of colonial militia began organizing to protect their towns and villages. Many ordinary citizens found themselves facing difficult choices. Some remained loyal to Britain. Others believed the colonies should govern themselves. Families sometimes held different opinions, yet most continued treating one another with respect and dignity despite these disagreements. The years that followed were challenging. Communities worked together to support one another during uncertain times. Farmers continued planting crops so everyone would have food. Blacksmiths repaired tools and wagons. Women managed homes, cared for children, and often took on additional responsibilities while many men served with local militias. Children continued learning their lessons whenever possible. Even during difficult years, everyday life continued. The seasons never stopped changing. Spring blossoms returned each year. Summer fields ripened beneath warm sunshine. Autumn forests glowed with brilliant colors. Winter quietly covered rooftops with fresh snow. Nature reminded everyone that hope always returned with another sunrise. In 1776, representatives from the colonies gathered in Philadelphia. There, after many thoughtful discussions, they approved one of history's most influential documents, the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration explained why many colonial leaders believed the 13 colonies should become free and independent states. It expressed ideas about liberty, equality, and the belief that governments exist to serve the people. These ideas would inspire countless generations around the world. The years that followed required great perseverance. Communities supported one another through sacrifice, determination, and hope for a peaceful future. Eventually, after years of effort, the conflict came to an end. In 1783, the Treaty of Paris officially recognized the independence of the United States of America. A new nation had been born. Yet the people who celebrated that achievement remained much the same as those who had first crossed the Atlantic generations earlier. They were farmers who rose before sunrise. Carpenters who built homes by hand. Teachers who patiently guided young minds. Sailors who trusted the wind. Merchants who welcomed travelers from distant lands. Families who gathered each evening around warm fireplaces to share meals, stories, and laughter. Life slowly returned to its peaceful rhythm. Fields once again filled with growing crops. Ships carried goods between friendly nations. Schools welcomed new students. Church bells echoed across quiet towns. The forests remained as beautiful as ever. Rivers continued flowing toward the sea, just as they had long before the first European ships appeared on the horizon. As years passed, the young nation continued to grow. New roads connected distant communities. Libraries opened their doors. Universities expanded. Inventors, artists, writers, farmers, and explorers all helped shape the country's future. Yet the story of colonial America never truly disappeared. Its small villages became great cities. Its simple dirt roads eventually became highways. Its wooden docks grew into modern harbors. Its quiet meeting houses inspired traditions of local government that continue today. If you were to visit places like Jamestown, Plymouth, Boston, Philadelphia, or Williamsburg, you could still find reminders of those early days. Historic buildings stand carefully preserved. Old cobblestone streets remain beneath the footsteps of visitors. Ancient trees continue growing where generations once walked. The gentle spirit of colonial America still lingers in these peaceful places. Now, as our journey through history comes to a close, imagine yourself standing once more beside the quiet Atlantic shoreline. The sun has slipped below the horizon. The sky is painted with soft shades of deep blue, violet, and silver. Gentle waves roll onto the sand with a calm, steady rhythm. A cool breeze moves through the tall grasses. Far above, countless stars begin to appear, one by one, just as they did centuries ago for sailors crossing the Atlantic and for families gathered outside their colonial homes. The forests are quiet. The rivers flow peacefully toward the sea. Lanterns glow softly in distant windows. Everything feels calm. Everything feels still. Thank you for joining me on this peaceful journey through the story of colonial America. I hope these quiet moments have helped you relax, unwind, and drift gently through the pages of history. Until our next adventure together, may your dreams be peaceful, your sleep be deep, and your night be filled with comfort and rest. Good night, sleep well, and sweet dreams.